Welcome to the Shaping Portsmouth podcast. Shaping Portsmouth is a collaboration of key Portsmouth businesses, transforming Portsmouth together. Hello, and welcome to another Shaping Portsmouth podcast with me, CEO Dave Humphries. And today I am joined by Andy Gallie of the Beacon Trust and also author of HMS To HMP. Welcome, Andy.
Thanks, Dave. Good to be here.
And great to have you along. We met at our Shaping Forces event recently.
Yeah.
So it will come as no surprise to people that there's going to be a bit of a forces theme to this, but also the fact that you wrote a book called HMS To HMP might give a bit of a clue as to where this is going, and a bit about your story. But before we get into that, I met you at our Shaping Forces event, which you came down to, and you represent a charity called the Beacon Trust. But obviously prior to that, you had a services career.
Mm-hmm.
So not originally from Portsmouth?
No, from Falmouth in Cornwall.
So you grew up in Cornwall, and did you live there all your life?
Lived there till I was 18, till I joined the forces.
So and you joined the Navy, yeah?
Yeah, senior service.
So yeah. So what why the Navy? What was the choice there? What inspired you to A, join the services, and B, the Navy particularly?
Yeah, I don't think it was so much of a choice, but more of a lack of impulse. I think I went to the job centre, and back then the cards were on the wall, as they say, but they physically were. And I just seen the Navy, and I went, yeah, that will do.
Okay.
And off I went to the careers office, and in May '98 I joined up.
Okay, and what did your naval career look like? What did you do? Where did you serve?
So I think sort of the majority, about 11 years of it, was at HM Naval Base in Devonport, serving on Type 22 frigates such as Cumberland, Chatham, Cornwall. And then I had a period at Flag Officer Sea Training and ended up on HMS Endurance in 2008, 2009, when it almost sank on the way back through the Magellan Straits.
Right.
On the way back from its 18-month deployment in Antarctica. So, hence the kind of, having a look at myself and my career and where I want to be.
Yeah.
So
the that incident specifically then had quite an impact on you. Is it fair to say?
Yeah, I think it was just one of those times in life where you think, I've got 3 young children, I'm doing all of this drinking and gambling, and my behaviour is pretty appalling. And I thought, it's because I don't grow up, because I'm in the armed forces. I just blamed. That's what I was doing.
Right.
And I thought, if I leave, I can be a good husband, a good dad. I'm going to sort my life out. I'm going to just be normal, whatever that is. And that's really what triggered me to think about leaving.
Yeah. So obviously your naval service is where the Portsmouth connection comes in. How long were you in Portsmouth?
Only about 18 months. It was after the flood, actually, and we all got landed into HMS Nelson to work out of the refit offices there whilst they decided what they'd done with HMS Endurance. And we moved up to, I think it was the Married Quarters at Paulsgrove, just at the top of Port Solent, and we were there for about 18 months.
And what specifically did you do in the Navy? What was your role?
So I was HR, really, if we look at the civilian kind of equivalent. Yeah, it's HR, the discipline kind of paperwork and discipline procedures and things like that. That was my main role. And
so predominantly office-based, but I'm guessing on ship you had supplementary roles, extra roles and responsibilities.
Yeah, so we would obviously have the ship's office, so we made sure that run fine, but our secondary jobs were either in the fire party, where I was water wall, so going into fires with a water wall nozzle, or first aid. Every member of the ship has a secondary role.
Okay, so you left the Navy in 2011.
Yep.
And what did you do after that? What was your role?
So my first job was as general manager of Red Roof Rugby Club. They were a National 1 rugby club at the time. And I went in there at first. They were in financial trouble, administrator, kind of, and soon sort of loved love sport anyway, and
Yeah,
rugby become my love really. And I moved into the general manager role to try and do what we could for the club. And following that, sort of I left there 2013. Had a couple of jobs in between, but the main move come in 2015, 16 when I moved away to London to work for the Not Forgotten Association, which led to a load of other little roles amongst that. And obviously following that, I thought I'd have a look and see what the jobs were like in HMP, which I'm sure we'll get onto.
Yeah. So, and I think one of the things you did for the Not Forgotten Association was Royal Garden parties.
Yeah, there was, so they would hold, obviously, the annual garden party at Buckingham Palace, but also kind of the Christmas party for veterans and dignitaries at St James's Palace. And moved into HR and finance within that kind of role. And unfortunately, as I say, we'll go into it in a minute.
Yeah, so building really on your naval background and what you did in the Navy. Yeah. Now, so I suppose we should overlap a secondary story on top of all of that around gambling addiction. Yeah, because that's essentially what you do through the Beacon Trust is support for gambling addictions in the services, particularly. But that's kind of what impacts your story so significantly at this point, isn't it, when you're working for the Not Forgotten Association. But I suppose what I'm interested in is, before we talk about what happened there and how you ended up in prison, how did you get to that point in the first place? When did gambling first become a thing for you?
Yeah, very, very early in life, and dominated my whole life and career, really. And it was 9 years old. We had quite I won't go into it now. It's not a long enough podcast, but it was a really difficult childhood in many ways around mum's mental health, pretty severe mental health. But look, anybody looking in from the outside would have said it looked lovely. 4-bed townhouse in Cornwall near the beaches. We were always immaculately dressed. It was very much an outwardly, lovely looking family. Behind closed doors, very different. And every time we had a night out, it would end in arguments and screaming and everything else. And that was normally because I'm this back and forth child who's bored. Can we go? We've all got a child like that sometimes. But my mum said one night, why don't you just go and play the machines? And that's what I done. Yeah. We were at a caravan park and I stood there for hours. And it's, looking back, I can see that night everybody's happy. They're laughing, they're joking. We went home, my sisters are happy. So gambling gives you far more than that money, even at that age. I'm 9, I'm not conscious enough, but children pick up on those atmospheres. And that's what I done. I picked up on my environment. And 10, 11, 12, I was constantly in the arcade, seaside town, very much. If we look at Selfie locally, children quite obsessed with the bright lights, the feeling of it, the warmth of it, the excitement that comes with it. So as a child, by the age of 13, my mum had actually called in Gamblers Anonymous. It was that severe.
Okay.
Stealing from family, stealing from my mum's purse every morning, skipping school.
So this is not just a case of you now reflecting back and realising, now that you're aware that gambling was a big part of your life, it actually was a problem as a young teenager. Yeah,
very, very young. When you look back, and probably I knew that day that my mum said, you've got a problem, this lady's come to help. I knew I had a problem. A child knows it's too much. Even at that age was ridiculously bad.
Wow. And so how did, as you grew up, and then obviously joined the Navy, and you're now earning you independent life of your own, not reliant on your parents. How did gambling then manifest itself in your naval career?
Yeah, I'd already started committing quite kind of large scale theft and fraud really on a bar that I was working on prior to joining the Navy. But it was where I talk about joining the Navy, why it escalated, is because we've got that ego boost now because we're a member of the armed forces. We're a big man at 18, but we may be struggling with training, struggling with the kit, struggling with certain aspects of our own lives that are then hyper focused on by your peers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have what we call banter. I love it. Some of mine is very dark humour, very close to the bone. But what happens is we laugh and we fist bump and we walk away as though nothing's happened. But actually, if we look at childhood, all of those small traumas are now being built upon by all of those. But it was getting to HMS Raleigh and being shown around. There was 40 or 50 fruit machines in HMS Raleigh. And there's people at every single one of them cheering, laughing, joking. And we're then encouraged to take risks, push yourself outside your comfort zone. And in week 2, you get a brief off Lloyds Bank saying, would you like a credit card? Would you like a loan? Do you want a car on HP? Come and see us. So for a gambler, it was immense. I took everything that was on offer. So by the age of 23, I'm £30,000 in debt. I've been married for 4 years, very, very young, and 2 young children living in heavily subsidised married quarters, which, we become reliant upon in the armed forces, or some people do as well. And that's where I first talk about that kind of link with domestic abuse, the financial abuse.
Okay. We'll come back to the domestic abuse piece a little further down the line. But so in terms of, somebody with a gambling problem in the Navy, you're now out to sea on a ship. What happens then? How do you get the fixes that gambling gives you when you're on a ship without the fruit machines, etc.?
Yeah, mostly then is going to be poker. So poker in the mess. And you'll always spot those that have a bit of a problem because it's almost incessant. We have to get down the mess at lunchtime and have a game. We start playing at 6 o'clock at night, 3-card brag, blackjack. And then we have things like horse racing nights up on the flight deck, blind boxing that we bet on. And it's always under the guise of it's for charity, which it is. But actually that's given me the ability to ridiculously gamble big amounts. And you're an able rate. You're at the lowest rank, but actually I'm putting loads of money on because this is a buzz. It's all so. Even at sea, there were so many ways that we could find. We gamble on anything, and like-minded people will find each other.
So, 2011, when you left the Navy, what did your gambling addiction look like at that point in terms of the impact it was having on you?
I mean, it had already. When I look at the harms it's already caused my children, the sort of either not having dad there at all, or dad's head is in his pad, or dad's up the bookies, but the shouting, all of those things. My children were already massively damaged. My marriage was massively damaged already. But anybody looking in from the outside would have seen what you see today, obviously, a good few years younger. But we look the same. We sound the same. Nobody would have had a clue. And so I think it was already, life was in a very bad way internally, but externally still looked okay. And it was when you leave the forces, as I say, we're not supported to understand what's going to come your way emotionally. That loss of sense of purpose, loss of identity, loss of camaraderie and banter, potentially loss of secure accommodation, loss of all of what you've known as a grown adult. You now don't have anymore the very following morning. And when you've got an addiction already, or a problem that could develop into an addiction, that is going to be a really telling point in your career and life. That, I know we discussed you left the police, and it's very much similar. Any uniform services, we lose that identity of who we are. You've maybe gone from chief such and such to Mr.
Yeah.
And actually that feels uncomfortable and it feels a big loss. So what do we do when we feel loss? We use alcohol, we use drugs, we use gambling. I say we. Some people will use some form of negative behaviour to cope.
So, I mean, you've mentioned domestic abuse there. But in terms of your family, the people closest to you, when you were at this point in your military career, how aware were they of your gambling addiction?
Very.
Right.
I think from a very early age, I met my wife who became my wife at 18, and my mum warned her then, he has got a serious gambling problem.
Okay. So it's not something that's hidden at all.
No.
It's very front and centre.
Yeah, and that's why I talk about the domestic abuse, because it's the control element. Because people will say, well, why didn't she? She knew. Why didn't she? One, because I'm a very good manipulator and very good at what you do. You're likable when you're not gambling. So she falls in love with that amazing man, and actually once the control is gained and gotten and there, then that's when we allow our mask to fall, really. But by which point, a whole family love you. The friends love you because you're this helpful, lovely guy. And of course, for me, if you had asked me at the time, I'd have said, I am that really lovely guy. She's a bit of a nightmare. But that's what they then think. If she finally opens up and has the courage to open up, these people will then say, oh, not Andy, he's a nice guy. He's probably only gambling a bit, maybe a bit too much. But, so what we've done is created this environment for ourselves in which, our family are controlled. And again, you asked me at the time and I'd have said, I'm a bit loud. My mood swings are a bit much, but I'm a good bloke. That's what I believed, But looking back, horrendous.
So you're serving in the military. You're very aware that you have this problem. You've got the domestic abuse issues layered over the top of that. So very damaging to your family and yourself. Everything that's going on with your life at this point in time. What support did you get from inside the armed forces?
Unfortunately, none. And it's not a blame game, because I don't blame them at all. Gambling was never discussed. Gambling wasn't talked about. We have the alcohol and drugs roadshows come around once a year, but gambling still to this day is heavily stigmatized and misunderstood. So I don't blame at all. But the key point in that was I won £127,000 on 32red.com at age of 27, so 2006. The debt's going to be paid off. We could have bought the married court we were in, two of them, to be fair. They were 30 odd £1,000 for a 3-bedroom house. And life was pretty much sorted. I went to bed at 10 o'clock, couldn't tell my wife just yet because she had threatened to kick me out if I gambled again. And I thought, tomorrow I'll tell her that we've won 5 numbers in the bonus ball on the lottery, because that was about right money. And within 5 hours, I'd lost every single penny. I got back up at around midnight, couldn't sleep, thinking of all these things I'm going to do with it, and we're going to have an amazing life. And I went to put £100 on, and back then the app said to you, why not reverse part of your withdrawal? Don't deposit anymore. And that's what I'd done. I reversed a few £100, then 1,000, then 2, then 5. And by 3 o'clock that morning, I'd lost every single penny. The bank account is on zero. And you're now looking around the house. There's the unpaid water bill, the unpaid gas bill, the cupboards are half empty, and you are in absolute devastation. So where I'm going with that is, obviously, the following day, I thought, I'll borrow some money, I'll win it again. I couldn't borrow a single penny, and the chances of winning it are zero. And I had a suicide attempt at age 27, and it was getting onto my next ship, or onto HMS Cumberland. And my divisional officer said, what was driving it? What's the problem? Do you mind me asking? I said, no, it's gambling. And he said, well, you need to stop. Brilliant. Could have done with you 20 years ago. I wouldn't be in this position.
Genius advice.
And I said, no. I said, it's an addiction. And he said, you need to keep that to yourself. He said, because otherwise I'll have you discharged for financial irresponsibility within a week. You've got access to secret and top secret material, sensitive materials. There's cash in the office. You're in a position of responsibility. I will have you discharged. You'll lose your security clearance, basically, and you'll be discharged. So, keep it to yourself is exactly what I did. And because I don't smell of alcohol, because I don't look under the influence, that's what we can do.
Okay. It's sad because I suppose for people that don't really know, you'd kind of look in and think that there's an extra layer of more support in something like the military services. But the reality is it's no different. There's nothing else there at all.
It's the uncomfortable, isn't it? If anything's uncomfortable, people don't know how to deal with it. He probably really wanted to help me, because we are caring for each other at all times. But if you don't know how to, you just,
Yeah. So obviously we touched on what you did when you when you left in 2011 and working for the Not Forgotten Association. And this is where the story for you really takes a turn, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what happened then? What did you actually do in terms of feeding your habit whilst you were at that role?
Yeah, so my first marriage had come to an end after 15 years. Met my second wife, believe it or not, on the very same day of leaving a 15-year marriage. Again, completely abhorrent, selfish, egotistical, all those things. And we moved away. And so I'm already going through all this turmoil of leaving my 3 children behind, leaving a 15-year marriage, but you're in this whirlwind again. And I moved to London on my own for the first 4 or 5 months whilst I waited for my wife to move up with the children. And that's where I was living in, I think it was Kilburn at the time, in a flat. And I had access to gamble every single night if I wanted to. You know, all I needed was the money to do so. And that is where I noticed within the role I was doing, there was access to cash. There was access to borrow, if I can phrase it like that. And that's what I started doing. I started borrowing money from the petty cash. If I had a win, I'd pay it back straight away. If I lost, I'd pay it back on payday. It come to the point that the petty cash was about £3,000. I couldn't pay it back. I then panicked, if you like, and I thought, okay, I can raise an invoice. And if it goes through and nobody raises any eyebrows, I'll double it, I'll pay it back, I'll walk away. And so I raised an invoice, changed the bank details to my own, and put it through for payment. So that day or so waiting for it to go through, and it went through. And of course, for a gambler, it very much starts off small. And, you know, people would say the greed kicks in. It doesn't. The risk increases. So once that risk increases, I'm now having to double 5,000 to 10,000 to try and pay them back. You're not going to do it. You know, in our minds, the distorted thinking is I'm going to win that 127,000 again, and I'm going to give them back double what I've taken, and then we'll walk away. And it didn't. Ultimately, it come to a head.
So obviously, when you're gambling, you're getting a sort of dopamine hit, and that, I guess, is linked to risk. You're doing something that has risk attached. Am I going to win? Am I not going to win? When you win, great. When you don't, you don't. But it's a kind of either or risk element. When you then get into the habit of then doing that with the invoices, does that become almost like the same thing? It's got a similar sort of risk hit to it.
I think it does. I'm with you. I think anything we do, like, you know, people always say, oh, it's about greed. It's about, do you know what? The money was the only reason I needed to win was so that I could get my next buzz. That's the reality of gambling. It's all about the anticipation, the unknown, the uncertainty. So when you're saying about the invoices, absolutely, there's a fear. And when that fear kicks in, the dopamine is dumping twice as fast. So there is a massive fear that somebody's going to find that out today. Then when it gets paid and nobody said anything, it's almost like a crash.
Yeah.
That's almost like a loss because there's a relief, but then all the dopamine stops.
Yep.
But I've now got the money, so I can get the dopamine again. So that vicious cycle of it's a constant 24/7 search for dopamine. You know, whenever I say gambling's not about money, people look at me as though I'm a liar, you know, and it's about greed. It's not. I could have won $1 million, I'd have lost $1 million and won the week after. There was no foreign holidays, no big watches, no big cars. It's constantly, if we look at heroin addict, if I gave him £1,000 today, he's got access to his next however many hits of heroin. If you give me £100,000 today, I've got the same amount of hits as he has. Unfortunately, gambling has no limit to the money. You know, if I'm an alcoholic, it may cost me £30 today to get absolutely out of my head. To get absolutely out of my head on gambling, there is no point. You can do it for 24 hours, 7 days a week.
Okay, so this part of your story comes to quite an abrupt end in 2018. So how did you get from doing that to ending up in prison?
So on the way into work one morning, I discussed it with my wife. She was actually a chartered accountant. So being married to somebody with fraud is never going to go down well. Plus, my behaviour is still the same in the home, the narcissism, toxicity, everything else. And on my way in, I've sent the CEO an email to say this is what I've been doing and this is where to look. I think it's about £30,000. I need help. Basically, that was the first cry for help. I obviously couldn't pay it back. They did offer me the chance. I've got nothing, so I couldn't pay it back. And I went to the police station, obviously, gave them everything in about half an hour. The police officer brought down 6 CDs with him, expecting a long, drawn out, and I just said, look, that's what I've been doing. And, went to court, Southwark Crown Court, couldn't afford a solicitor because I'd lost everything and I couldn't get legal aid because I'd earned too much. So I've ended up in Southwark Crown Court on my own completely. The judge wasn't going to listen to me as, sort of representing myself. But the second time around he had to. And I wrote him a letter and he did give me a chance. He gave me and when I look at that and people would expect me to be a big advocate for lesser sentences, I'm really not. I genuinely believe people need to suffer the consequences because walking out of court that day after the suspended sentence, I wasn't cheering or buzzing or, loving it. But actually the next time I'm faced with the compulsion to gamble, I'm going to think, well, how bad is it? I could take a risk. Whereas if you've suffered catastrophic consequences, maybe it's different. I'm not saying it would because my story goes somewhere else. But,
Same thing as the paying of the invoices all over again, isn't it? It's just court now, not
it's
invoices.
Just court. And things get bigger.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with everything in life. It's the tolerance level increases.
Yeah.
So, when we deal with, like a lot of people would probably crumble with a lot of what a gambler would deal with in day-to-day life, but we don't because we're used to that on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And I moved back to Cornwall. So that was actually in 2016, October 2016. I ended up in prison in 2018. We went on a night out in Falmouth. We'd moved back down there again. And I believe my partner was flirting with a taxi driver or the other way round. And I've got out and I've actually gone to pull the taxi driver out of the taxi. I have, and my partner's come around and they've both been assaulted in this kind of scuffle, if you like. It's just the most abhorrent thing I'll ever admit to. I talk about a lot of bad things. And that's how the suspended sentence was then activated.
Yeah.
So on getting to prison, that's why I asked for help officially, only to be told gambling's a secondary addiction. We need to deal with your alcohol and gambling will subside. Nobody would listen to the fact that I used alcohol to drown out the losses.
Yeah.
I used alcohol to celebrate the wins. And I couldn't find £2,000 to get my buzz of gambling, but I could always find £20 to buy cheap alcohol.
Yeah.
And I can then forget about everything till the next day. So even the criminal justice system, the police, when they clearly seen, the forensic police officer seen £206,000 in 5 months. But at that stage, what support is available? Where are we directed to? Nowhere. The courts, I don't know, and prison the same. Nobody gets it.
So you've got a 17-month prison sentence. Is that what you served?
That's what I served.
That's what you served.
Yeah, I've got 31 months.
31-month sentence. So you served 17 months in prison. Mm-hmm. You're released. And in terms of the rehabilitative effect of prison, I'm gaining an idea from what you said then that it probably didn't deal with your addiction. But how did you feel coming out of prison?
I was completely complacent simply because after that point of being told it's secondary, I decided to knuckle down. Like I'm not a silly person. I have a decent level of intelligence, and I thought, right, you need to help yourself here. Like where you're going wrong. You're a good person inside, but you can see your behaviour is appalling. It's shocking. And I started writing my life story down as a cathartic exercise to try and understand, why do I do what I do? Why do I believe certain things? Why is my moral compass so skewed? And that's what I'd done. I'd done a couple of counselling courses, level 2, level 3 in counselling skills. And I wanted to use what I use now, my lived experience. So on getting out, I was completely complacent. I gambled for ages, but I gambled every day in prison because prison is not set up for rehabilitation.
Yeah. And I guess then it becomes cyclic. So you get another job, all the same things again, and
Similar.
you end up 2021 back in prison.
Yeah. I'd done a level 4 diploma in addiction counselling on getting out to try and use what I use now. And I went I'd done my volunteer hours at a residential centre, and then they offered me a role as peer mentor, only for HR to say, we can't give him that job because of the criminal conviction. That's where I took a job at a pig farm, and genuinely, again, I use that word normal. I just wanted to be normal. And I took a job as farm secretary thinking it's admin only and I'll be okay.
And was it a similar fraud in terms of the circumstances of it?
Identical. Almost identical.
Yeah.
It was, again, I bought a scratch card for £2 and a £120, and it was during lockdown whilst I was on universal credit. And that allowed me to buy a load of picnic things. It sounds minuscule, but actually, that's what gambling gave me again, was that really good memory of a great day, good picnic out. And before long, I'm doing £20 in the bookies, and I'm praising myself that I've got this under control. You're doing so well. No, you wasn't. It was days until I was back online. Once I was online, same again. Invoices, change the bank details. I'll win it. I'll pay it back. It's genuine belief, but it's such distorted thinking when you're in addiction. You're not thinking clearly that actually this is going to go wrong.
So you're back in prison again. Obviously come out of prison again. What changed the second time?
So it actually, the change happened before I went into prison. So I waited almost 2 years for sentencing. In the meantime, I planned my suicide because I thought there is no way of stopping gambling. I've tried everything. There is no way. And I drove to Cornwall to tell my mum and my children what I'd done, in the hope that they would stick to their word of me being cast out of their lives. And yes, again, that is massively selfish. I could have scarred them for life, as even more so. And they didn't. They asked me to get help. So that's where I ended up in Gordon Moody, 14-week residential rehab. I've been told by probation that we don't have a budget, but actually it was free. Gordon Moody is set up as a social, just rehabilitation centre specifically for gambling. And that's where I met my therapist with lived experience. And he is probably the most amazing man I'll ever meet. He told me straight, I think being ex-forces, we do deal with things delivered to us very straight. Yeah. I don't go around the houses. And he really got through to me. So by the time I got back to the point of sentencing, I worked in this kind of space for about 18 months, a gambling recovery space, using my sort of insight then and lived experience, as we now call it. So by the time I got to prison, which is where I met Governor Dave Crawford in HMP Channings Wood, and probably the second most amazing man I've ever met, because he let me use the skills that I had, and he thought so much of veterans himself that I want to use you guys in my prison because you have skills, you have the discipline, you have the loyalty. Even though you're prisoners, I still see you. And do you know what? He absolutely nailed it on. And I set up my own peer support groups in prison, designed the 12 keys, and started thinking about what I wanted to do when I got out, which was this really. Did I think I could? Probably not. I thought there would be, a lot more hurdles. And that's where I met Neil and Ian from the Beacon Counselling Trust, who had established the Armed Forces Gambling Support Network. So it was literally straight out of prison, almost into that. And that was just over 2 and a bit years ago.
So tell me about what the Beacon Trust and the Armed Forces Gambling Support Network actually is and do.
Yeah, so Beacon Counselling Trust were a mild to moderate mental health service based in Liverpool, Merseyside, Cheshire, in that area. But they, on the back of 10 years worth of research by Swansea University, it proved that veterans and serving personnel are 10 times more likely to suffer gambling harms. Right. A lot of reasons for that, some of which I've covered today. And so they decided we need to tackle this problem. They both ex-paras themselves, a lot of veterans around our service, and they set up the Armed Forces Gambling Support Network so we could do the whole of the UK. And so what we offer today is free level 1 90-minute training to anybody who supports our armed forces in any form, and an all-day level 2 Royal Society of Public Health accredited Ofqual level 2, and that's again completely free to business those that have signed the Armed Forces Covenant, so businesses,
Yep.
serving personnel, and veterans, and that's what we do day in, day out.
So, if anyone wants to get more information on that, or most particularly help for a gambling addiction, how do they best go about doing that?
So there's different ways. If they can visit the Beacon Counselling Trust website, where there's a Battle in the Odds page, an Armed Forces specific page. I'm obviously quite active on LinkedIn, on social media. They can reach out to me directly, because sometimes all you want at first is to speak to somebody who's been there and done it and is a safe space. And if they want to book training, again, through Beacon Counselling Trust to info@Armed Forces, or to myself at Andy.Gallie at beaconcounselingtrust.co.uk. So many ways to get hold of us. And as I say, that could be anything from a half an hour talk, lived experience talk, all the way up to the full day training. And if it's events, health fairs, like I come to your conference, that's the kind of areas where we are, because that's where we're having those important conversations. I met some great people at that Shaping Portsmouth or Shaping Forces conference, that I ended up doing a webinar with just last week. It's an amazing community where I see so many conferences where it's second or third hand information, and coming to the Shaping Forces one was just direct business to serving personnel, business to veterans, business to business. And I just left there going, that's what we need, is not somebody telling me about it. So,
and
sorry, I went off there.
No. And I think it's a really valid point, because what we're doing is not trying to provide solutions when we're not the people with experience, but it's about connecting. It's solely about putting the people with the lived experience in the front of the people that want to hear from them. And whether that's helping the business community understand how to support their veteran workforce or local veterans in the community, whether that's helping local veterans connect with business support and other things, it's the key is bringing those people together. And I think it's exactly like you said about people who are looking for help just want to talk sometimes to someone who's already walked the path that they feel they're on. And I think, business support in any form is exactly the same as that. If you're a small business on the start of your journey, all you want to do is talk to someone who's already trodden that path, isn't it? Yeah. And I think it's the same with all things in life. So I think that's why it works for us, and why I think your story and connecting you with the people that need help around gambling is so vitally important. This is something we could talk about for hours in terms of what's happened to you. We've kind of reached a point, I suppose, where there is a happy ending there in terms of what you're now doing for you. But how does that look like for you now in terms of your family life and your social environment and professional, and do you think there's a risk of a third prison sentence?
I'm going to say 100% no risk of that third prison sentence. But as with any addiction, as with any issue like that, it is, you can never say never, because it's a daily battle. I don't, people will say my recovery, I love it. I'm obsessed by it. They're looking deeper at myself. But I was just down yesterday in Portsmouth again doing the abseil down the Spinnaker Tower. Yeah. And my middle daughter actually come up from Cornwall to support me. Yeah. And that nearly chokes me up now. Not a lot gets me, but I damage those relationships so far that to see them rebuilding, to see the pride then, if you like, that she can see. Yeah. And my partner is massively supportive. My son is doing brilliantly. My youngest daughter is still so hurt. And sort of that is a really difficult one. Because legacy harms don't go overnight. No. Just because I'm in recovery and I'm doing okay doesn't mean everybody I've ever hurt is also out there all singing, all dancing. And we need to remember that and offer those support services to them as well, which Beacon do through Nicola, who's an affected other herself. But professionally, as I say, this kind of thing, this just, I've just been at an army barracks this morning supporting an individual. There's just nothing better. It's my purpose every day, and I love it. But going back to the lived experience thing, I think it's my biggest frustration in the world is I keep hearing people talking about what I would have been thinking, what I would have gone through. We hear, especially around domestic abuse and things like that, and people say, oh, he was probably thinking that, he was probably thinking this. Why not ask? Because I'll tell you, I'm quite open. I will give you any bit of research you need to stop this happening to anybody else. But let's not make assumptions, So, and gambling's the same. All I'd say to anybody out there is please don't assume gambling isn't harmful, because it can be.
Yeah, sure. We will make sure that in the links on this podcast, there's all the connections for people who want to get hold of you or the Beacon Trust and get support and help or help to support others. But let's finish on something completely different. You mentioned coming back into Portsmouth to abseil down the Spinnaker Tower at the weekend. We know a few people that also did it at the weekend. Joe from Motivate and promoting the City of Culture as well at the same time as he did it. But you've obviously got that brief connection with the city from the time you were posted here off the back of Endurance. We always like to finish these podcasts with a recommendation, the place that you might most like to go or the thing you most like to do in Portsmouth. So what would be your top one?
I'm going to say Port Solent, just because I can remember the first time we went there and it just felt like a discovery. Obviously, loads of people know it's there, but we lived at the top of the hill. We'd never been down there. And all of a sudden, if I think back to it now, I think of quite a peace. Yeah. I mentioned I don't get peace from my head with gambling. That place that day, I sat outside of, I think, a cafe down on the water's edge, and being from Cornwall, I felt home. Yeah. Almost home. And I loved it down there. Yeah. Just, yeah.
I can see why you would feel that with the marina and the waterside. It is lovely, and it would very much be like being a small coastal place down in the West Country. So it is great. We do like Port Solent. Loads of A, great businesses, but B, some great hospitality venues there, and on a nice sunny day, it's a great place to sit and watch the water and the boats, and beautiful, and something completely different from what we've been talking about. But wow, loads to unpack from that one, and as I said, we could talk about you, talk about this so much more, and talk with you for hours. Really appreciate your openness and your honesty. Great that you've kind of dealt with what you've needed to do, and you're rebuilding the relationships, and you're now supporting others. And as I said, we'll connect people through the links in the podcast. But Andy, thank you very much for coming in and sharing your story with us.
No, genuine thank you to you. It's it's always important. So it is a genuine thank you.
Brilliant. And hopefully we'll see you again at some more Shaping Armed Forces events.
Will do.
Thanks. This podcast was brought to you by Shaping Portsmouth, working to make Portsmouth the #1 UK city in which to invest, live, learn, work and visit. To find out more, please visit shapingportsmouth.co.uk. This podcast was supported by Spark Community Space and Portsmouth Community Lottery.